The laboratory hummed quietly as Krelthax stared at the glowing screens in front of him. His four arms moved across different controls while his compound eyes focused on the data streaming before him. As a student at the biggest university in the galaxy, he had spent many months studying one very specific topic: how different alien species react to pain. His research was simple but thorough. He had collected thousands of videos, medical reports, and scientific studies from across the known galaxy. Every species had been documented and analyzed. The results were clear in his mind. The Zenthai people barely made a sound when they were hurt. Even when their blue skin was cut deep or their bones were broken, they would simply acknowledge the injury with a small nod and continue with their work. Their logical minds processed pain as nothing more than useful information about their body's condition. The Brokma were even more impressive. These rock-like beings would seal their wounds with mineral secretions from their own bodies and keep working as if nothing had happened. Pain seemed to bounce off them like rain on stone. His own people, the Veltaran, experienced pain through their distributed nervous system as mild discomfort at worst. When a Veltaran was injured, the sensation spread throughout their insect-like body, diluting the intensity until it became barely noticeable. It was an efficient system that kept them functional under any circumstances. But humans? Humans were completely different. Krelthax clicked his mandibles in what passed for amusement among his species as he watched another video file. A human male had accidentally touched a hot surface in what appeared to be their food preparation area. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. The human jerked his hand away, shouted loudly, shook his hand in the air, and then ran cold water over the minor burn while making distressed sounds. Fascinating, Krelthax muttered, switching between his native clicking language and standard Galactic. Such an excessive response to minimal tissue damage. He opened another file. This time, a human female had bumped her leg against a piece of furniture. She immediately grabbed the injured area, hopped on one foot, and made facial expressions that his translation software identified as indicating severe distress. The injury appeared to be nothing more than minor bruising, yet her reaction suggested life-threatening trauma. Video after video showed the same pattern. Humans crying from small cuts that would barely register to other species. Humans fainting from pain levels that wouldn't slow down a Zenthai child. Humans making loud vocalizations and dramatic gestures over the smallest discomforts. The data was overwhelming. Out of 4 to 7 documented sentient species in the galaxy, humans showed the most extreme and irrational responses to physical pain. Their evolutionary development had clearly prioritized emotional expression over practical functionality. Krelthax pulled up his comparative analysis charts. The measurements were precise and undeniable. On a scale of pain tolerance, humans ranked dead last. They were, by every scientific measure, the weakest species in the known galaxy when it came to handling physical discomfort. Such primitive pain processing systems, he noted in his research log. Humans appear to have evolved from prey species that relied on loud distress calls to summon help from their social groups. This has resulted in dramatically amplified responses to minor physical trauma. The laboratory door opened with a soft hiss, and Professor Velmora entered with her usual graceful movements. She was old even by Veltaran standards, her chitinous exoskeleton bearing the scars and wisdom marks of centuries of scientific research. Krelthax, she said in standard Galactic, I have been reviewing your preliminary research findings. Excellent timing, Professor, Krelthax replied, his secondary arms gesturing toward the displays. I believe my data conclusively demonstrates human inferiority in pain management. Their responses are consistently excessive compared to all other documented species. Professor Velmora moved closer to examine the screens, her ancient compound eyes scanning the data with practiced efficiency. Your collection methods are thorough, and your measurements appear accurate, she acknowledged. However, I am concerned that you may be drawing conclusions without sufficient real-world observation. Professor, the evidence is clear, Krelthax insisted. Humans demonstrate the most dramatic pain responses in the galaxy. They cry, scream, and collapse from injuries that other species would simply ignore. Their evolutionary development clearly shows weakness rather than strength. The elderly professor's antennae twitched in what might have been amusement or concern. Tell me, young scholar, have you ever actually observed humans in their natural environment? Have you seen them face real danger or genuine challenges? Krelthax gestured toward his data displays. These recordings show thousands of hours of human behavior under various pain conditions. Laboratory analysis provides objective measurement without the complications of field variables. But laboratory conditions rarely reflect the complexity of real life, Professor Velmora said slowly. Which is why I am assigning you to extended field research. Field research. Krelthax's multiple arms paused in their constant movement. You will spend the next semester aboard a human research vessel as an observational student. The ship is called the Pioneer, and they are conducting deep space archaeological work. You will document human behavior in their actual working environment. Krelthax felt a flutter of uncertainty in his distributed nervous system. Professor, surely my laboratory analysis is sufficient for academic purposes. Direct observation, young Krelthax, she said firmly. You will live among humans, work alongside them, and observe how they truly behave when faced with real challenges. Perhaps you will discover that academic theory and practical reality do not always align as neatly as we might expect. But my thesis clearly shows. Your thesis shows what humans do in controlled, safe environments where they can afford to react emotionally to minor injuries, Professor Velmora interrupted. What I want you to discover is what humans do when the stakes are real and others depend on them. As his professor left the laboratory, Krelthax turned back to his glowing displays. This field assignment would actually be perfect for his research. He would finally have the opportunity to document human weakness in real time, under actual stress conditions. When humans face genuine danger instead of minor laboratory injuries, their true fragility would be impossible to hide. He began preparing for what he was certain would be a simple confirmation of everything his data had already proven about human evolutionary shortcomings. Retry. The human ship was smaller than Krelthax had expected, but everything looked clean and well organized. As the airlock doors opened with a soft hiss, he saw 3 humans waiting for him in the docking bay. They wore matching blue uniforms with patches that his translator identified as belonging to the Terran Research Division. Welcome aboard the Pioneer. The tallest human stepped forward with what appeared to be genuine excitement. She had short brown hair and bright eyes that seemed to sparkle with curiosity. I'm Commander Kate Morrison. These are my colleagues, Dr. James Patterson and Chief Engineer Mike Sullivan. Dr. Patterson was a thin man with gray hair at his temples. He extended his hand toward Krelthax in the human greeting gesture. We're really honored to have you with us. Your research on pain responses across different species is already causing quite a stir in academic circles back on Earth. Krelthax carefully shook the offered hand, noting how warm and soft human skin felt compared to his own hard shell-like exterior. Thank you for allowing me to conduct my observational research aboard your vessel. Chief Engineer Sullivan, a stocky man with calloused hands, grinned widely. Not a problem at all. We've never had a Veltaran scientist aboard before. This should be educational for everyone. We're heading to investigate some ancient ruins on a planet called Kepler 442c, Commander Morrison explained as they walked through the ship's corridors. The archaeological potential is enormous. Should give you plenty of opportunities to observe how we handle challenging situations. Over the next few days, Krelthax settled into life aboard the human ship. His specially designed equipment constantly recorded everything around him, measuring stress responses, pain reactions, and behavioral patterns. The humans seemed genuinely interested in his work and asked many questions about Veltaran physiology and culture. What fascinated Krelthax most was how readily his observations seemed to confirm all of his research predictions. These humans appeared to react dramatically to the smallest physical discomforts, just as his laboratory data had suggested. On his 3rd day aboard, Engineer Sullivan was performing routine maintenance on a cargo bay door. As he worked, he accidentally bumped his shin against a heavy metal container. The reaction was immediate and exactly what Krelthax had expected from his studies. Oh, damn it. Sullivan grabbed his injured leg and hopped backward on one foot. His face twisted into an expression of obvious pain, and he muttered several words that Krelthax's translator marked as colorful profanity. The engineer shook his leg, bent down to rub the injured area, and continued making distressed sounds for several minutes. Krelthax quickly recorded the entire incident. According to his measurements, the impact had caused only minor tissue compression with no actual damage to bone or muscle. Yet Sullivan's response was as dramatic as if he had suffered a major injury. This was precisely the kind of excessive reaction that his thesis predicted. Typical human pain amplification, Krelthax noted in his research log. Subject demonstrates extreme vocal and physical responses to minimal physical trauma. Behavior includes vocalization, protective gesturing, and continued focus on minor injury long after initial impact. A few days later, Dr. Patterson was working in his laboratory, analyzing samples they had collected from a previous mission. While adjusting a delicate instrument, he accidentally caught his finger in a panel joint. The reaction was swift and unmistakably human. Patterson immediately pulled his hand back with a sharp intake of breath. He examined his finger carefully, even though Krelthax's instruments showed only superficial skin compression. The doctor walked to the ship's medical station, cleaned the minor injury with antiseptic, and applied a small bandage that was completely unnecessary from a medical standpoint. "You know," Patterson said to Krelthax with a rueful smile, "sometimes I think our fingers are designed specifically to find every sharp edge in the universe." Even Patterson's attempt at humor after the incident seemed to confirm Krelthax's theories about human behavior. They used social interaction and storytelling to process their pain experiences, turning minor injuries into shared experiences that bonded their social groups. Another clear example, Krelthax recorded. Subject seeks medical attention for injury requiring no treatment, then engages in social bonding behavior related to pain experience. This supports the theory that human pain responses evolved primarily for group communication rather than actual physical necessity. The ship's daily routine provided many more examples. When Commander Morrison bumped her elbow against a door frame, she immediately grabbed the area and made a sound of distress. When a junior crew member accidentally touched a surface that was slightly too hot, she jerked her hand away and spent several minutes examining her uninjured skin. Each incident reinforced what Krelthax believed he already knew about human weakness. Their nervous systems seemed designed to overreact to every minor discomfort, turning small problems into dramatic events that required attention and sympathy from others. But as the Pioneer approached their destination, Krelthax began to notice something else about the humans that didn't quite fit his theories. Despite their dramatic reactions to minor injuries, they seemed remarkably calm and competent when preparing for their actual mission. The planet Kepler 442c contained the ruins of an unknown alien civilization. Long-range scans had detected a massive derelict ship in orbit, its architecture unlike anything in the galactic databases. The energy readings from the ancient vessel suggested that automated systems might still be active after thousands of years. Initial scans show structural instability throughout the alien ship, Commander Morrison announced during their mission briefing. "We're detecting significant energy fluctuations that could indicate active defense systems or failing power sources. The archaeological value is immense, but the risks are substantial." Dr. Patterson studied the sensor readings with obvious excitement. "We're looking at technology from a completely unknown spacefaring species. The scientific implications are staggering." "Which is exactly why we proceed with extreme caution," Morrison decided. "Away team will consist of myself, Dr. Patterson, Engineer Sullivan, Specialist Johnson and Park, and our guest researcher Krelthax." As Krelthax prepared his recording equipment for the mission, he felt a mixture of anticipation and scientific curiosity. Soon he would have the opportunity to observe humans under real stress conditions, facing genuine danger instead of minor laboratory accidents. When confronted with actual threats, their true weaknesses would become impossible to hide. This would provide the perfect conclusion to his research on human fragility. The ancient alien ship was unlike anything Krelthax had ever seen. The corridors stretched high above their heads, with walls that seemed to glow with their own soft light. Strange symbols covered every surface, and the air itself felt different somehow, charged with energy that made his sensitive antennae tingle. The away team moved carefully through the massive hallways, their equipment scanning everything around them. Krelthax noticed that the humans' heart rates were elevated and their stress hormones were increasing. His instruments detected the familiar signs of nervousness and anxiety that he had come to expect from their species. "These power readings are incredible," Engineer Sullivan said, running his scanner along what looked like a control panel. "Whatever this ship was built for, it required enormous amounts of energy." Dr. Patterson was busy documenting the strange hieroglyphic symbols that covered the walls from floor to ceiling. His recorder captured every detail while he made excited notes about the unknown language and artistic style. "James, you need to see this," Commander Morrison's voice crackled through their communicators from somewhere deeper in the ship. They followed her signal through several more corridors until they found her standing in a chamber so large it took Krelthax's breath away. The room stretched up into darkness above them, with crystalline formations reaching toward a domed ceiling that displayed slowly moving patterns of colored light. In the center of the chamber stood a massive pillar covered with more of the mysterious symbols. "It's beautiful," whispered Specialist Park, a young woman whose job was to record everything they discovered. Her voice was filled with wonder as she looked around the cathedral-like space. "And dangerous," added Specialist Johnson, studying his instrument readings with a frown. "I'm detecting massive energy fluctuations throughout this entire structure. The power levels are unstable." As if responding to his words, the chamber suddenly filled with a low humming sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The crystalline formations began to pulse with increasing brightness, and Krelthax's sensitive hearing detected ominous creaking and grinding sounds from throughout the ancient ship. Automated defense systems are activating, Commander Morrison shouted over the growing noise. Everyone out, now. They ran toward the exit, but the ancient ship seemed determined to stop them. Heavy blast doors began slamming shut throughout the structure, and the floor beneath their feet started to buckle and crack. Warning lights flashed from panels they couldn't read, and the humming sound grew louder and more threatening. A massive support beam, thicker than a tree trunk and made of some unknown metal, suddenly broke free from the ceiling high above them. The sound it made as it fell was like thunder, echoing through the chamber as tons of metal plummeted toward the fleeing team. Time seemed to slow down as Krelthax watched the enormous beam falling directly toward Dr. Patterson. The human scientist was helping Specialist Park navigate around a crack that had opened in the floor, leaving him directly in the path of the falling debris. Patterson saw the beam coming. Krelthax could see the human's eyes widen as he looked up at the approaching danger. But instead of diving away to save himself, Patterson did something that made no sense according to everything Krelthax knew about human behavior. He pushed Specialist Park out of the way first. The beam struck Patterson across both legs with a sickening crash, pinning him beneath tons of twisted metal. The impact was horrifying. Krelthax could hear the sound of breaking bones and crushing tissue even over the noise of the collapsing chamber. This was the moment Krelthax had been waiting for. This was when the human would finally show his true nature. All the research, all the data, all the laboratory studies had led to this point. Now Patterson would scream and cry and break down completely, proving once and for all that humans were the weakest species in the galaxy when faced with real trauma. Krelthax activated his recording equipment, ready to document the complete collapse of human courage under genuine pain and terror. But Dr. James Patterson did something that contradicted every piece of data Krelthax had ever collected. He remained completely silent. Not only was Patterson silent, but his behavior made no sense at all. Instead of the hysterical breakdown that Krelthax's research predicted, the trapped human immediately took control of the situation. His voice was calm and steady as he spoke to the others. "I'm all right," Patterson said, though Krelthax's instruments were detecting pain signals that should have made consciousness impossible. "Check the others first. Is anyone hurt?" Krelthax stared in complete disbelief. His most sensitive equipment was registering pain levels that would kill most known species, yet Patterson was conducting a rational assessment of their situation. The human's legs were clearly crushed beneath the massive beam, his body was going into medical shock, and his pain receptors were firing at intensities that should have rendered him unconscious immediately. But he was asking about the safety of others. "The ship's power core is becoming unstable," Engineer Sullivan reported, his scanner beeping urgently. "We have maybe 15 minutes before this whole section collapses completely." "Can we lift the beam?" asked Specialist Johnson, examining the twisted metal that held Patterson prisoner. Patterson shook his head calmly. "Too heavy. And moving it would destabilize the ceiling structure. You need to find another way out of here." Commander Morrison knelt beside her trapped colleague. "We're not leaving you behind, James." "You have to," Patterson replied, his voice still impossibly steady despite what Krelthax's instruments showed was agonizing torture. "But first, I need to help you get past the security systems. The blast doors are controlled from a central computer node, and I can guide you through the bypass procedure." Krelthax watched in growing amazement as Patterson began explaining complex technical procedures while tons of metal crushed his legs. The human's voice never wavered, his hands remained steady, and his thinking stayed completely clear despite experiencing pain that would have killed any other being in the galaxy. Nothing in Krelthax's research had prepared him for this. The ancient ship groaned and shuddered around them as more debris fell from the damaged ceiling. Krelthax kept staring at his instruments, unable to believe what they were showing him. Dr. Patterson's pain levels were beyond anything he had ever recorded from any species, yet the human continued to function as if nothing was wrong. "Listen carefully," Patterson said to Engineer Sullivan, his voice completely steady. "The central control system has 3 backup nodes. You need to access the maintenance tunnels on the lower level to reach the primary override." Sullivan knelt beside the trapped scientist, holding his scanner ready to record the technical instructions. "Got it, document. What's the access code?" "The system uses a rotating cipher based on the ship's power fluctuations," Patterson explained, drawing diagrams in the dust with his finger. His hands should have been shaking from shock and trauma, but they moved with perfect precision as he sketched out complex wiring patterns and power distribution systems. Krelthax watched in fascination as Patterson guided Sullivan through procedures that required intense concentration and technical knowledge. The human's brain was processing incredible amounts of pain while simultaneously performing detailed engineering calculations. It was impossible according to everything Krelthax knew about nervous system function. When Specialist Park, who had been knocked unconscious when Patterson pushed her to safety, began to wake up, the trapped scientist immediately shifted his attention to her medical needs. "Park, can you hear me?" Patterson asked gently. "Don't try to sit up too quickly. You hit your head when you fell." With careful movements, Patterson examined the young woman's pupils and asked her simple questions to check for brain injury. His touch was gentle and professional, showing no sign that he was experiencing any pain himself. When Park tried to see his injuries, Patterson calmly redirected her attention. "Focus on me, not on what happened," he told her. "What's your full name? What ship are we on? Do you remember what we were doing here?" Krelthax's instruments showed that Patterson's vital signs were becoming more critical by the minute. His body was losing blood, going into deeper shock, and processing pain signals that should have shut down his nervous system completely. Yet he continued to care for others with the same calm professionalism he had shown before the accident. "I don't understand," Krelthax finally said in Standard Galactic, his translator struggling with concepts that had no equivalent in Veltaran experience. Patterson looked up at the alien student. For just a moment, Krelthax saw something in the human's eyes that he had never seen before in any species. It wasn't weakness or fear or the breakdown he had expected. It was a kind of quiet strength that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than physical endurance. "Don't understand what?" Patterson asked. "Your pain readings are beyond measurement," Krelthax explained, showing Patterson the data on his instruments. "These levels should make consciousness impossible. How are you still thinking clearly? How are you helping others?" Patterson was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. The ship shuddered again, and more warning lights began flashing throughout the chamber. They could all hear the power core becoming more unstable, building toward what would clearly be a catastrophic explosion. "Because they need me too," Patterson said simply. The answer made no sense to Krelthax's scientific understanding. Pain was a survival mechanism designed to force organisms to protect themselves from further harm. It should override all other considerations, making self-preservation the absolute priority. Yet Patterson was ignoring his own survival needs to help others escape. "But your survival instincts should be stronger than social considerations," Krelthax protested. "Every species prioritizes individual preservation when facing mortal danger." "Do they?" Patterson asked. Then he began working on something beneath the rubble, his hands moving carefully among the twisted metal and broken systems. Commander Morrison noticed what he was doing and her face went pale. "James, what are you programming?" "Emergency containment protocols," Patterson replied calmly. "The power core explosion will spread through the ship's energy grid. Someone needs to isolate this section to prevent a chain reaction that could destroy your shuttle." Krelthax realized what Patterson was planning. The human was preparing to stay behind, to manually control the containment systems while the others escaped to safety. He was choosing certain death to give his teammates a chance to survive. "No," Krelthax said, understanding flooding through him. "You cannot sacrifice yourself. It contradicts all evolutionary logic." "Does it?" Patterson asked, still working steadily despite the crushing weight on his legs. "Or maybe evolution is more complex than we think." Commander Morrison knelt beside Patterson, her own voice breaking slightly. "We don't leave our people behind. That's not how we do things." "Sometimes you have to," Patterson said gently. "That's what makes us who we are, Kate. We protect each other, especially when it costs us everything." But Krelthax was no longer listening to the conversation. His instruments were showing him something that challenged every assumption he had ever made about pain, survival, and the nature of consciousness itself. Patterson's nervous system wasn't malfunctioning or primitive. It was incredibly sophisticated, processing pain at levels that would overwhelm any other known species. The difference was that Patterson was choosing to function through it. Not because he felt less pain than others, but because he felt more and had somehow learned to endure it for the sake of others. The human capacity for suffering wasn't a weakness, it was the foundation for a kind of strength that Krelthax had never imagined possible. "Your species," Krelthax whispered in amazement, "you're not weak at all." Patterson smiled slightly, even as he continued programming the systems that would save his friends' lives. "Took you long enough to figure that out." The ship's power core gave another dangerous surge, and they all knew their time was running out. The ancient ship's power core was building toward a massive explosion that would destroy everything within several kilometers. Patterson's hands moved quickly across his personal communicator, entering codes and coordinates that would seal off their section and allow the others to reach minimum safe distance. "I need all of you to listen very carefully," Patterson said, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had made a final decision. "The route to the shuttle bay goes through the maintenance shafts 3 levels down. The access codes are in my communicator, but you'll need to move fast once the containment fields activate." Commander Morrison realized what Patterson was really saying. "You're planning to stay here and control the systems manually. The containment fields need constant adjustment to prevent cascade failure," Patterson explained. "Someone has to maintain them until you reach the shuttle and get to safe distance." Krelthax stared at his instruments in growing amazement. What he was seeing made no sense according to any scientific model he knew. Patterson's pain receptors weren't damaged or underdeveloped. They were hyperactive, processing sensations at levels that should have shut down his entire nervous system hours ago. But instead of shutting down, Patterson's brain was somehow compartmentalizing the pain, setting it aside to focus on what needed to be done. It was like watching someone carry an enormous weight while pretending it didn't exist. "This is impossible," Krelthax muttered in his native language, then switched to Standard Galactic. "Your physiological readings contradict everything I understand about pain response and survival behavior." "What do you mean?" asked Specialist Johnson, who was helping Park to her feet. Krelthax showed them his instrument readings. "Dr. Patterson's nervous system is processing pain at levels that would kill most species instantly. His brain should have shut down to protect itself from trauma. Instead, he is performing complex technical calculations while simultaneously monitoring everyone else's medical condition." "That's just James being James," Commander Morrison said with a mixture of pride and sadness. "He's always put others before himself." "But that makes no evolutionary sense," Krelthax protested. "Self-preservation is the most basic survival instinct. No species should be able to override it so completely." Patterson looked up at the young scientist with tired but patient eyes. "Maybe you're measuring the wrong thing, Krelthax. Maybe survival isn't just about individual preservation." The ship shuddered violently, and more debris crashed down around them. They were running out of time, but Krelthax couldn't stop thinking about what he was witnessing. Everything he thought he knew about humans was wrong. "I need to help lift this beam," Krelthax announced suddenly. "What?" Sullivan looked at him in surprise. "The structural analysis is irrelevant," Krelthax said, moving to position himself next to the twisted metal. "We are not leaving anyone behind." Using strength he had never tested before, the young Veltaran braced his multiple arms against the massive beam. His species was physically stronger than humans, but the weight was enormous and the twisted metal was wedged deep into the floor. "Everyone help," Commander Morrison ordered. On 3. Working together, they managed to shift the beam just enough for Sullivan and Johnson to pull Patterson free. The humans' legs were badly damaged, but their medical bay would be able to repair most of the injuries if they could get him there in time. As they carried Patterson through the collapsing corridors toward the shuttle bay, he remained conscious and continued giving them directions through the failing ship systems. Even while being rescued, he was still trying to take care of everyone else. They reached the shuttle just as the ancient ship's power core began its final overload sequence. The small craft launched quickly, racing away from the expanding explosion as the derelict vessel tore itself apart in brilliant flashes of energy. Later, in the Pioneer's medical bay, Krelthax sat beside Patterson's recovery bed with his research data spread out around him. The human was sedated now, finally allowing his body to process the trauma he had endured for hours. "I have been completely wrong about everything," Krelthax said when Patterson woke up. "Wrong about what?" Patterson asked, his voice weak but curious. "About human pain responses. About weakness and strength. About everything I thought I understood." Krelthax pulled up his comparative data. "Look at these readings. Your nervous system doesn't process less pain than other species. You process more. Much more." Patterson listened quietly as Krelthax explained his new understanding. Human nervous systems were incredibly sensitive, designed to detect and respond to the smallest problems before they became serious injuries. When humans cried out for minor cuts or burns, they weren't overreacting. They were using their sophisticated early warning system exactly as evolution intended. "But you have also evolved something else," Krelthax continued. "The ability to choose when and how to respond to pain based on circumstances. When you are safe, you allow yourselves to feel and express everything. When others depend on you, you can endure anything in silence." So we're not the weakest species in the galaxy? Patterson asked with a slight smile. You may be the strongest, Krelthax replied. Your species has achieved something remarkable. You feel more pain than anyone else, but you can also bear more when necessary. It is not the absence of pain that makes you strong. It is the choice to endure it for others. 6 months later, back at Galactic University, Krelthax presented his revised research to a packed auditorium. His new paper completely changed how the galaxy understood human physiology and behavior. I went to study human weakness, he told the assembled scientists, and discovered a strength so profound that it disguised itself as fragility. The human capacity to suffer in silence for the sake of others may be the most remarkable evolutionary achievement in the known galaxy. In the audience, Professor Velmora's antennae twitched with satisfaction. Sometimes the most important lessons could only be learned through direct experience. On Earth, Dr. Patterson received a copy of the published paper with a personal note from Krelthax. Thank you for teaching me that true strength is not about feeling no pain, but about choosing when and how to bear it. Patterson smiled as he read the words, then returned to his work. After all, that's what humans did. They endured, they helped others, and they kept going no matter what it cost them. It was simply who they were.